Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something that might not sound super exciting at first, but trust me, it gets interesting. We're diving into taxes.
Taxes.
Yeah. And you've sent in some really cool sources. We've got stuff from Investopedia and some historical stuff, too.
Yeah.
So it seems like you really want to go deeper, beyond just like, when do I pay them?
It's a fantastic area to explore. Taxes have been around for a really long time.
Right.
And looking at how they developed can give us a much better understanding of why they exist, not just what they are.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we're going to be unpacking the why. But before we get there, we got to nail down the what.
Okay.
So Investopedia says taxes are a financial obligation imposed by a government on its citizens.
Right.
Which sounds straightforward enough,
It does.
but I feel like there's got to be a little more to it.
Absolutely. There is a really crucial distinction to make here. It's not like paying for a service directly.
Okay.
Like your electricity bill, you pay for the power you use,
Yeah.
right? But with taxes, you're contributing to a much broader pool of funds.
Oh, okay. So it's not like I pay you money, you give me X service.
Exactly.
It's I contribute to the system, and then the system
The system provides.
provides all sorts of things for everybody.
Precisely. Things like our infrastructure, education, healthcare, even defense. It's all about the collective benefit, not just like individual transactions.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we've established that taxes are a way for governments to fund these essential functions.
Right.
But, these sources that you sent over,
Yeah.
they also suggest that the U.S. hasn't always relied on taxes in the same way.
Yeah, that's right. Early in U.S. history, direct taxation was it was pretty minimal. The government relied on things like user fees,
User fees.
like for things like ports and even sometimes the sale of government assets.
Really? Wow, like that's crazy to imagine. Like, how would that even work today?
I know.
I guess the role of government, like what it does, has changed a lot over time.
For sure. The U.S. government today, it has a much, much broader reach than it used to. And like this idea of income tax as a steady revenue stream, it didn't really come about until 1913.
1913. Whoa, that's way later than I would thought.
It does seem late in the game, doesn't it? But it makes sense if you think about it, right?
Yeah.
The idea of having a strong central government,
Right.
the power to impose this nationwide income tax, that was a pretty hot topic back in the early days of the U.S.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really fascinating little historical tidbit there.
It is.
Hey, by the way, before we get too much further into this, we just want to say how much we appreciate you listening.
Yes.
And if you're finding this deep dive helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel.
Yes.
It really helps us keep bringing you this kind of content.
We appreciate the support.
Now, let's dig into all the different kinds of taxes there are out there.
Yes, let's.
Investopedia, it mentions a bunch. Income tax, property tax, sales tax, and even things like capital gains and inheritance taxes. It can feel a little overwhelming.
Oh, it's definitely a lot to take in, but let's try to simplify things a bit, okay? Imagine a pie chart
A pie chart, okay?
representing all the ways that a government can collect revenue.
I'm picturing it.
Great. Now, income tax, both individual and corporate, would typically be one of the biggest slices of that pie.
Right,
It's basically a percentage of your earnings
right.
or a company's profits. That goes to the government.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's what people usually mean when they complain about taxes.
Right.
What about property tax? How does that fit in?
So property tax is another slice of the pie.
Okay.
Often managed more at the local level.
Local. Yeah.
And it's based on the value of the things that you own, like your house or your land.
Oh, okay.
And this helps fund things like schools, local services.
Interesting. So it's like the more valuable your property, the more you're contributing to your community.
You know what? Yeah.
Cool. And then there's sales tax, which seems totally different.
Yeah, sales tax is that little extra bit that you pay when you buy something
Right.
at a store. It gets added on to the price of the goods and services.
Oh, okay.
And it's a way for governments to get revenue from all of us, from all of our consumer spending.
So it's like a tax on buying stuff.
Exactly, a tax on consumption.
And then there's capital gains and inheritance tax. Those seem like different beasts altogether.
Yeah, those are a little more specialized.
Okay.
Capital gains tax applies when you make a profit from selling certain assets,
Okay.
like stocks or real estate.
Right.
And then inheritance tax, that gets levied on assets that are passed down after someone dies.
So like those are taxes on very specific types of financial activities.
You got it.
But I'm curious, Do all countries have the same mix? The same combination of all these different taxes?
That's a great question, and the answer is no. It varies a lot from country to country. Some countries lean more heavily on income tax,
Yeah.
while others might get more of their revenue from sales tax or
Right.
even other sources.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. Each country's tax system is really shaped by its own unique circumstances. Its economic conditions, its social values, its political landscape.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Man, I'm starting to see how complicated this whole thing really is.
Yeah.
Are there any countries that stand out as having particularly high tax rates?
Oh, for sure. According to World Population Review, Belgium, Finland, and Portugal have
Oh.
some of the highest tax rates in the world.
Belgium is almost 80%. What do they do with all that money?
Well, it's important to remember that higher tax rates often go hand in hand with more robust social safety nets,
Oh, okay.
more public services,
Gotcha.
like universal health care and education.
Right. So it's not just about how much you're paying, but also what you get back in return.
Exactly. It's about the value that you're receiving for your contribution to the
Oh,
system.
a really good point.
It's interesting, though, right? You have some countries with these really high tax rates,
Yeah.
and then you have others with no income tax at all.
Yeah. Like, I think Investopedia mentioned a few.
Yeah.
UAE, Saudi Arabia,
Right.
a
Right.
bunch of oil-rich nations, it seems like.
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of those countries, they generate so much revenue from oil exports
Right.
that they don't need to rely on income tax as much. But it's all about balance.
What do you mean?
Well, they might make up for it with higher sales taxes
Oh, okay.
or corporate tax rates.
I see.
Governments always need to find ways to bring in the money to fund what they do.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. So no income tax doesn't necessarily mean like a total free ride.
Right.
It just means, the burden shifts to different places. Man, this is really making me see taxes as this giant puzzle.
It is kind of like a puzzle. Like, how do you fund everything a nation needs?
Yeah, and all the pieces of that puzzle,
Yeah.
they can change,
Yeah.
depending on a country's economy, social values, even the political climate at the time.
Right, right. It's never just about the numbers. It's about
people.
Yeah, it's about people's lives. Speaking of, you mentioned earlier about like shaping behavior.
Yeah.
Like I've heard of sin taxes on things like tobacco and alcohol.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic example. So the idea there is by making those products more expensive
Right.
through taxes,
Yeah.
you try to discourage people from using them.
It's like a little nudge from the government.
It is a nudge in a certain direction.
And then there are tax breaks for
Right.
things like donating to charity
Yes.
or investing in green energy.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So that's another way that governments can use taxes.
Good, yeah.
They can incentivize the behaviors they want to see.
They can encourage investment in certain areas or promote things that they think are good for society.
Wow, I
Yeah.
never really thought about it all connected like that. So taxes aren't just about raising money.
No.
They're about guiding behavior and influencing what happens in society.
They really are, and it highlights how closely tied they are to what we value and what's important to us as a society.
Right. But who gets to decide all this? Like, who decides what gets taxed and by how much?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's not just a bunch of economists sitting in a room with calculators.
Right. Yeah, I figured.
It's a lot more complicated than that. In most democracies, tax policy is determined by, the folks we elect.
Oh, okay.
So it's a political process with all the back and forth and compromises that go along with that.
So it's economics, it's public opinion,
Yeah.
it's political maneuvering, like it's a whole recipe.
They stew. Yeah.
So how does that all actually work? Can we break down like how tax policy is made?
Sure. So in the U.S., at least, it usually starts with the president proposing a budget.
Okay.
And that budget, it includes their ideas for tax policies.
So the president's basically saying, this is what I think we should tax, and this is how much.
Exactly. They're laying out their vision.
Yeah.
And then Congress gets involved.
Okay.
Both the House of Representatives
Right.
and the Senate, they have committees that review that budget
Right.
and propose their own changes.
And that's where the real arguing happens.
That's where the fun begins. Yeah, lots of debate.
Yeah.
Lots of negotiation.
Yeah. And sometimes they can't even agree, right? Like, I've heard of those government shutdowns.
Oh, yeah. That's when things get really messy. But it is a system that's designed to make sure that lots of different perspectives are heard.
Right.
And that people, they have a say in how their tax money is spent.
And how their behavior is
Yeah.
influenced, we were just talking about.
Yes, exactly. It's a multi-layered system with a lot of moving parts. But the basic idea is to find that balance between raising the money that's needed and also reflecting what people want and what's important to them.
That's a good point. This has been really insightful.
Good.
I feel like I'm finally getting a grasp on the big picture of taxes.
That's what we're hoping for. It's a topic that can get so bogged down in all the little details
Yeah, you go.
that it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture, the history, and the ideas behind it all.
No, it's honestly more fascinating than I thought it would be.
I agree. There's a certain elegance to how taxes connect, economics and politics and even our own personal values.
It really is a reminder that they're more than just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Right.
They reflect who we are as a society, and they have a huge impact on the world around us. Welcome back to the deep dive. So in the last part, we were talking about how tax policy is made, which is pretty complex.
Yep.
But you also mentioned earlier about going back in time and exploring the history of taxation. I'm ready for that time travel.
Excellent. Fasten your seatbelts because we're going way back, all the way to ancient civilizations.
Ooh, ancient civilizations. Okay. So were taxes always about funding governments like we think of them today?
Not exactly. In ancient societies, taxes often served very different purposes. Like, for example, in ancient Egypt, taxes were frequently paid in the form of labor or goods.
Oh, interesting. So instead of handing over coins or filling out a tax form,
Right.
you'd give them a day's work or a share of your crops.
Exactly. It was a way for the pharaoh to amass the resources to build those incredible monuments like the pyramids.
Oh, right. Makes sense. I mean, those pyramids weren't going to build themselves, and they probably were paying contractors with gold coins back then. What about other ancient civilizations? Do they have similar systems?
Yeah, so in ancient Rome, taxes were crucial for supporting the military and paying for things like their road system and those amazing aqueducts.
So even back then, taxes were used to build and maintain the stuff that kept society running.
Absolutely. But the way we do it, the methods and the reasons for taxation, they've really changed over time.
What happened after the Roman Empire fell? Did taxes just disappear in the Middle Ages?
Not at all. So in medieval Europe, the feudal system was dominant. And feudal lords, they would impose taxes on their vassals.
Oh, the vassals, okay.
Right. And those taxes, they could be all sorts of things. Labor, crops, sometimes even military service.
Sounds like the lords had a pretty good deal.
Well, it definitely benefited the ruling class, but it was also a way to keep some order and offer some protection during a time that was pretty chaotic and dangerous.
Right, okay. That's a good point. So how did we go from feudal lords to the tax systems we have today, the modern ones that are so complex?
Yeah, that's a long and winding road involving, revolutions and big changes in how economies work. And, people started to have different ideas about what the role of government should be in society.
So as governments started doing more, they needed more money.
Yeah.
Which changed how they collected taxes.
Exactly. And that led to things like the income tax and the sales tax that we talked about before.
Right, full circle. From baskets of grain and a day's labor to these super complicated tax codes we have now.
It's pretty wild, isn't it? We've gone through thousands of years of taxation, and even though the way we do it has totally transformed, the basic idea is still the same. Governments need resources to do what they do, and they get those resources from the people.
Yeah, I see that. This whole historical perspective, it really shows how taxes are kind of woven into the fabric of civilization. But why should we care about this history? How does knowing about the past help us understand taxes today and in the future?
I'm glad you asked that. Studying the history of taxation helps us understand how taxes have shaped societies and even driven major historical events.
Oh, wow.
It also gives us the tools to understand the arguments and debates that we're having about taxes right now.
It's like knowing where we've been can help us decide where we want to go.
Exactly. The history of taxation shows us that taxes aren't just about numbers or boring economic theories. They're about people and power and the choices that we make as a society.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening. We covered so much, from the basic definition of taxes to all the different kinds, the reasons they exist, and this fascinating journey through history.
I'm so glad you found it insightful. And we've really only just scratched the surface, but hopefully this has given you a good starting point for understanding this complex and always changing world of taxes.
It definitely has. I feel way more knowledgeable about taxes now. And honestly, I'm even a little bit intrigued by them.
I love to hear that. It's often when we understand the why that things start to get really interesting.
You're right. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of taxes. We hope you enjoyed the ride.
And if you'd like to explore more on your own, be sure to check out the sources we used. You'll find links in the show notes.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more insightful explorations like this one. We're always diving into new topics, and we would love for you to join us.
Until next time, keep those minds curious.